thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're really excited to have Alexa Hoffman here to talk with us. She works for the Ocean First Institute, and she is a research scientist and educator for them. And she's going to share with us how she came to work in the field and the path that she took. So she's joining us all the way from Colorado. Thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to what you have to share.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. My name is Alexa once again, and I do in fact work in Colorado as a marine biologist, which is something I'll get to a little bit later on about how I end up in this position I am at now. And so there are so many different ways to get into marine science. And so I'm today going to talk about my journey and how I ended up on my career path, and then talking a little bit about some of the options outside of what I chose, because I've interacted with a lot of different people in the field, all doing really amazing but different things. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oh, and as a side note too, I'm going to be focusing on sharks because I am specifically a shark biologist, which is my passion. And so I'm happy to share some shark facts at the end as well, if there's any questions about it. And then for you, Marion, this is very interactive. So if you have any questions along the way, just unmute yourself or write in the chat, I guess. All right, cool. Oops. Okay. All right. What's it like being a shark biologist? And to start with that, it kind of goes back to my upbringing. So I grew up, if I can click through. I grew up in Maine, so right along the Atlantic, right outside of Portland, Maine, where I first started my love for the environment. So it started with my backyard, my neighborhood. I was lucky to live in kind of a remote area with a small group of people my age as well. And we had a big, like 60 acres behind our road. And back there too, there was rivers, there was a stream, there was a tidal river that led into the ocean. And so that's what we call the other world. So it started with the other world, me and my best friend, who is actually also a marine biologist now, just funny enough. We started a club where we would teach all of the other kids in our neighborhood about endangered species and go around and showing them snakes and frogs, identifying different plants and shells. And so right from the beginning, I kind of always knew that I wanted to do something with the environment, and I was fascinated by animals, which is unique. Not everyone in my position knew from such an early age, but I was just genuinely very curious. And you'll even see throughout my path, even though I knew I wanted to do something with nature, because of how broad the field can be and how many different directions you can take it, I myself have wandered back and forth. And so, yeah, here's a picture of me on the coast as a kid. And then my first experience with like actual sea creatures was on this boat. He was a diver, and he would take kids out on the boat, go down, scuba dive, and bring back all these creatures. So that's what the picture is on the right. I have a sea star on my head and in my hands. And from that moment, I was like, I want to be just like him when I grow up. And then, yeah, so here are some more pictures. This is Maine. This is one of our most famous little lighthouses. And my family, we had a house, a family house that was running throughout our family that was out in the middle of the ocean. And so this picture here with the lobster in my hoodie is from that island. So I spent a lot of time exploring the tidal pools. I learned how to identify crabs. I'd count and collect and try to identify different species. And whatever washed up on shore, I would collect. We had a lot of horseshoe crab skeletons and stuff like that too. And so I was also really lucky and fortunate. My family was able to travel a decent amount. It was kind of the way that we spent time together. as my parents both had pretty strenuous careers. So we got a chance to go to different islands. So this was the first time I ever left the country, and I was able to go to Aruba. And this was the first time I got to see what the tropical environment looks like. And from that clear water where you can put a snorkel in and see anything around you, I was even more hooked. Because I'm a little scared of dark water. And even as a kid, as fascinated as I was with the ocean, I still thought there was sharks in the deep end of the pool when I was swimming. And I was terrified. And I think it was almost that fear that drove that fascination, which is actually a common phrase amongst us shark scientists too. Fear to fascination is how a lot of us ended up in the field. And it's how we kind of try to, talk to other people about it and turn that fear also into fascination for everyone else. So those are my brothers and my mom also in the picture. Yeah, and so this is just another picture. My dad was also, he grew up on the coast, and so did my mom. He's from Washington, she's from Maine, and he was a big fan, my dad was a big fan of water sports too, so we spent a lot of time on the beach watching him. And yeah, so my family's a big water family all in all. And so in high school, and so growing up too, and I didn't have time to add these pictures, all throughout high school, because I lived on the coast, my friends and I would spend as much time, in middle school, as much time as we could on the beach. There was a small island in our town that we would go to and check out the tide pools, and just, it was always around me, which I know is unique. Not everyone has that opportunity. And I have a lot of friends who were completely landlocked that are also still in my field. And yeah, and so then that took me in high school on a very unique opportunity to go to a semester school program called the Island School. So this program was based out of the Bahamas. It is a semester school that is also attached to a research station where they do marine research. And so this is an experiential based learning school where you spend about 3.5 months there, 100 days. And you do everything from kayak trips to solos to anthropology work, talking about the history of island nations and colonization, and just about everything related to humans and then how we can live better in a place. So we lived on a sustainable campus, and a lot of it was learning about how can we make the places we live in better and how can we best take care of our environment. And so a big part of that was our research class. So this is also to note. So this is also where we got, in our first 3 days, we did a 3-day kayak trip. And then we also got scuba certified, which was an incredible experience. And yeah, so these are some pictures of me scuba diving for the first time, and some of the people that I went on this trip with, or this semester with. And so the biggest component that meant the most to me was the research. So this is a picture of a good portion of the students that was in the semester with me, along with my research advisor, who's in the middle. I'm actually in the tie-dye, so I kind of stand out in the center. And this behind us is the wet lab at the research station. The research station is called the Cape Eleuthera Institute. So it's connected and affiliated with the Island School. And so as a student, you are put into small groups of about 5 to 6 other students and a researcher. And so the research projects expand from, this, when I was there was looking at lemon sharks and skates and how electricity inside underwater electric currents impact their way to navigate and forage. So this was basically looking at what is the impact of, those transatlantic cables that transport power across the ocean, and stuff like that. And then there was also a lot of deep sea work. So there was one with this big machine called the Medusa, which was this big baited underwater vehicle that they would send down and collect footage for 24 hours. And at this point, this was important because there was no real research being done on what is even in the deep sea in this area. And this kind of calls into the important fact that most of the ocean is unexplored. And so even though we have some basic understanding of what the bottom of the ocean kind of looks like from like a topography standpoint, we have no idea the animals that compose these different ecosystems. And so there was also research being done on aquaponics, so learning how to create sustainable food systems. And then my research I was involved in was looking at the post-release mortality rate of Cuban dogfish. So this Cuban dogfish right here was our study species, and these are small shark species that live in the deep ocean, about 3,000 feet below the surface. And they're also commonly found in the Gulf of Mexico. And so that is part of the reason we were doing this study. So these species in the Gulf of Mexico are caught often by accident, by large fisheries, which is a huge problem because shark species in general are at risk because their populations don't reproduce as quickly. And especially with deep water species, some of them aren't able to reproduce until they're almost 60 years old. So it's super important that we protect their populations and understand how we're impacting them. And so part of that is understanding how they respond biologically to capture. So I was working under a master's student, Brendan Tawar, right next to me in the hat and the black shirt. And he was doing this for his master's research out of Florida, looking at the post-release mortality rate of the Cuban dogfish. And so we took a bunch of different parameters. So we would drop a long line of baited hooks down to the bottom of the ocean, around 3,000 feet below the surface. And then we would leave that line out for about 3 hours, haul it back in, and then we would take measurements on anything we pulled up. So this picture over here is we would put the small sharks in a cooler to make sure they're staying well ventilated and able to breathe. And then we flip them over into tonic immobility, which kind of puts them in a relaxed state. So we can take things such as body measurements. And then in this picture, they're taking blood, which is an important thing that a lot of researchers take whenever they catch any type of shark, because that blood can tell us a lot about what stage of reproduction and what sex and gender of these species are, and also kind of how stressed they are by looking at different chemicals in their blood and a bunch of other things. So now they're actually looking at microplastics in some of the blood samples as well. But for our research purposes, we were looking at stress hormones. So there is something that builds up in the blood when a shark gets stressed. And if it gets too high, that can cause the shark to have bodily harm and increase the chances that they will not make it after capture. So this is also part of the reason as researchers we work as quickly as we can. And so this was the first time I got field experience. And so that was one of the coolest parts about this. So throughout the duration of this project, oh yeah, so here's also a measurement. So this is actually, unfortunately, a dead shark that was a baby that was inside this one here that was captured and did not make it. So we always make sure that our samples go to science and education if they don't make it. But yeah, so we take body measurements along the top, and so I just have that picture to show you that. And yeah, so here's a picture of our boat. So it was pretty crammed, and so this has all of the gantries and the rope of how we would deploy this and then haul it back up. And so we were also operating off of a continental shelf. So here is a picture of one of my research advisors way, way deep. And this is an old aquaculture cage that sits right at the shelf where the water goes from about 50 feet all the way down to about 1,000 feet and then 3,000 feet. So we have a really unique opportunity to do deep sea research so close to shore and making it really accessible and a really great study site for all that work to be done. And so once these Cuban dogfish were captured and worked up, then we would actually put them back down in a cage at the depth they were caught at and where they were monitored on cameras for 24 hours After 24 hours, there was a little gate that would open, and the sharks, if they could make it out, they would swim on out, and then we would then haul that net the very next day and take a look at if there was any sharks left, those that didn't make it, and then therefore we were able to create trends and patterns of biological indicators that would tell us if a shark would live or not live after capture. And so they were actually able to find really cool results. I mean, it was very sad work, but very important, because they were able to tell fishermen in the United States that if a shark is under a certain size, they likely will not make it, and therefore they should keep it and then use it and put it to good and not put it to waste. And if a shark was bigger than a certain size, then they should throw it back, because then it will be able to reproduce and help sustain the population. So stuff like that is really important to figure out, because we have pretty destructive fishing practices. And so a lot of scientists these days, all of their research is based around conservation or helping manage fisheries and make everything more sustainable and protect these species. So another big component of this was outreach. So this was my first experience at getting to teach. So we worked with the community, and we would talk to a bunch of stakeholders that would come in that were fishermen. They worked for Bahamas government. We would present our research, and then what I'm doing here too is we're talking about sharks in general. So doing that whole fear to fascination talk, talking about how cool and important sharks are for the ocean and why we need to care about them, even if we're all a tiny bit scared of them. So breaking down the myths, basically. And so another part of this too was we got our first chance to write a research paper based off of our work and then create a poster. So this was really cool because it gave us skills to practice presenting and kind of putting our information together. It was the first time that we really got experience as scientists. And I feel really lucky because this, is work that most people don't do until college, and I got experience to do it early. And so, I guess it skipped a little bit, but I realize I've been talking a lot too, so I just want to check in if there's any questions so far, Adrian. Okay, cool. And so I realize I'm missing a couple slides, and so there was some steps in between me being in high school and then these pictures here. So I finished up high school, and I kind of actually had a change of heart. So I was first looking at colleges in marine science because, I was very dead set on it. But I kind of had a moment of panic about the environment and climate and wanting to understand better about how climate change is happening, how it's affecting the environment, and how it's impacting people, and kind of how it's all interconnected. So that journey actually took me out to Colorado, where I am now. So I did my undergraduate degree at Colorado College, where I studied environmental science. And so there I took a lot of classes on mostly Colorado-based work. So where I went to school was pretty experiential as well. I learned from an early age that that's pretty much the only way I learn well, is being very hands-on. And so this was really cool too, because from the beginning, I was able to meet a researcher or professor and get involved in his work. And so I was actually up on a mountain in Colorado looking at the tree line, the alpine tree line, so about 13,000 feet. We were looking at all the tiny little seedlings and how climate change is driving the migration of these tree lines further and further up as temperatures change. And so a lot is still unknown about how these tree lines are managed, the relationships between, the microclimates of the different trees and nutrients and all this stuff. So from sophomore year until my senior year, I worked on this project doing a lot of field work up in the mountains, so very opposite to what I had done previously. And I learned a lot about climate change and also a completely different type of data, taking measurements and aging trees using what's called GIS. So looking at basically maps and kind of looking at spatial relationships over space and time, and trying to create models. So these models then would help us be able to predict in the future where these tree lines are moving. And so the reason that research was so important too is on the top of mountains, that alpine tundra is what we call sky islands. So unlike the regular tundra up in Canada towards the Arctic, there's more latitude they can go up with for the most part. When species migrate, they can migrate versus latitudinally, whereas on mountains, they can't really do that. So as these tree lines are migrating upwards, that environment for those alpine tundra creatures and species is getting smaller. So it's another way of looking at protecting these, being able to plan ahead in future, just to create conservation, guidelines and just general knowledge. Because a lot of science is just people being curious, trying to figure things out that we just don't know. And if you don't know about something, how can you care about something or fix something? So my junior year, after doing this research for a while, I was able to have enough credits to take semester off. And I actually went back to the Bahamas, to the Cape of Luther Institute, where I was an intern. And so I actually worked under my same advisor from when I was in high school, which was a funny coincidence. And on this project, I was working with the Exuma Sound Ecosystem Research Project. And so the Exuma Sound is this big basin that is off the tip of Eleuthera in the Bahamas, where I was based out of. And there had been a lot of research done, like I mentioned before, in the deep sea, and then also a lot of shallow reef work, a lot of coral work, mangroves research, but nothing had ever really been studied about the open ocean. So the open ocean is the largest ecosystem on the planet, making up of about 99% of the biosphere, which is the lens of the environment that contains biological life, which is kind of crazy to think about. And it's basically this vast, vast desert where there's not really nutrients or structure. It contains a lot of migratory species. And so my advisors were looking at, for their PhD, a bunch of different things. So I got to do work on sharks. I got to do work on little macroinvertebrates living in the water column that are the basis of life in that ecosystem. We also did stuff with migratory fish species, where we deployed this underwater aggregation device that would allow migratory species to stop by. And we'd have video cameras. So I got a lot of different research done. And so a part of my project too was actually helping out a research class like I had taken when I was in high school. So it was a very full circle moment. And so some of the work here too that I want to show you is we're doing the same sorts of, obviously these are much larger sharks than what I was previously dealing with. But we do a lot of the same things. So on the left, that's a picture of me at night with a bunch of our students doing night work, looking at different species that are out in the night versus day. And that is a 8-foot long lemon shark. And so funny story with that too was there was a second one that was kind of circling the boat pretty far away, very cautious. They're very nervous creatures. And it was just kind of like, hey, what's up with my friend? I'm just gonna watch out, hang here, wait till he's done. And so here we have atonic immobility, relaxing the shark, and we're taking a bunch of different measurements. And then we also hold it here while we take out the hook. So we're not making sure we're not leaving that hook in the mouth. And also doing this as quick as possible. And this was cool because our students got to help take a lot of these measurements. So the one in the middle is a tiger shark. So our students actually were here for this one as well, which was a really cool experience. And this was the first tiger shark I'd ever seen. She was 13 feet and she did not want to be hauled in. She put up quite a fight, but it was really, really cool. to see such an enormous, amazing creature. And this was the first time I got to take certain measurements of muscle sample and blood and all those sorts of things. And so there's also my friend Savannah, who is a research technician, with the measurement ready to go. And then right here on the end is a dusky shark and the tail of the dusky shark. So when we're doing measurements on the body, there's 3 different measurements we take. One to the base of the tail where that black rope is, one to the fork kind of in the middle of the tail, and then one to the very end up where my research advisor's hand is. And so this was a really amazing experience. And also something to note too. So like I mentioned before, I was always scared of sharks. And I still have a healthy fear in a certain way, respect. They are wild animals. And just like bears or moose or any other wild animal, they need their respect and space. And so it's really cool as researchers getting to collect information to help protect these species and kind of debunk those sorts of things that, for example, that sharks hunt people. That's not a thing at all. Sharks are very timid. And when they accidentally do bite someone, it is, you know, they don't have hands. They can't figure out what's what. And so, yeah, that was some of the work that I did. And so here is just some more pictures. So we would also, in this project, be deploying satellite tags. So here there's a satellite tag being put on a silky shark. And so that was the study species for one of my advisors, because anecdotally, they had only ever seen juvenile silky sharks in this entire basin. So there was the question, is this area being used as a protective area for these sharks at a certain stage in their life? And so that's a really important question a lot of scientists ask, because we want to know where these sharks are going. That way we know what areas need protection. So especially looking at important life stages like where they're born, where they spend their first couple of years of their life, maybe areas they return to every year, like the Exuma Sound, and kind of where they breed and where they feed. And so these are cool collaborative questions too, because it requires a lot of countries usually to come together. So this was also a collaboration between like Bahamas and the United States too, because these sharks don't really care about country boundaries. They travel all over the world. And so that's part of the cool thing about studying the ocean, is it's a lot of collaboration and work between different countries and different scientists all working together, because you know, it's so hard to get these permits and also these samples that when you're out in the field collecting these things, you're also collecting samples for a dozen other scientists at the same time, which is a really special thing about this field. And so some of the skills that are required really just are a passion for things. And this is just about research specifically. I'll kind of get into my path now and how I've kind of diverged from research a little bit. But really, you just need a passion. There's this thought that as a scientist, you need to have the best grades. You need to go to the best schools. You need, you know, all of this stuff. And that's just not true. I did not have the best grades. I have very bad ADHD, but I love this work and I love these animals, and I work really hard because I care about something and I care about this. And so all of those things put together has kind of led me to my career path today. And it's about meeting people and finding people that, you know, also care about what you're passionate about. And when you find other people that are passionate about what you're passionate about, the world gets a lot smaller. And so you meet a lot of people like-minded, and it gives you opportunities. And that's kind of how you establish your career. It's not all about grades. It's not about being the best. Or so a lot of people, my friends that I've talked to that are now scientists, were like, I didn't think I could be a scientist because I didn't think I was smart enough. I thought that too. But you just have to find something you're passionate about. And so this kind of begs the question of what my day-to-day looks like too. And so this is also just some good photos. So that picture in the center is that fish aggregation device I was talking about, where we had this device 30 feet below the surface that kind of acted as this attraction for fish that were migrating through. They would come and hang out along the bottom, which you can kind of see the bottom below those buoys. There's a bunch of fish hanging around. So we would go to these sites and kind of take inventory of how many of certain fish species were there. We deploy cameras that would record for 3 hours, pick them up, and kind of see what is out in this space, what is using the Exuma sound to migrate, and what is maybe more residential. And so one of the things too is this was a really cool experience, that this was the only time this happened when I was there, that we were out doing snorkel surveys and this little silky shark showed up. And it was cool because I thought there was a big wahoo, which is like just giant fish that was kind of doing a little circle, going in and out of the blue water, which was really cool. And then I thought it was a wahoo again, and I looked a little closer and I was like, huh, that's a little shark. So it allowed us to be able to tag the shark and understand where the shark was going. So also here on the left too is a acoustic receiver that my advisor is deploying. And so these are really cool, is because when we tag species with an acoustic tag, these receivers, every time that individual passes by these receivers, it sends a ping. So we know how often they're using different areas. And so this is a really cool type of tag that a lot of research scientists use, especially out of Florida too, because there are so many marine scientists there that there's this huge, what we call acoustic array, which is like hundreds of miles and thousands of these receivers deployed all along the coast. And this is kind of where that collaboration comes in, because when you tag an individual, you have access to all of those receivers. So even though your grant or your funding might only allow you to put out 2 and pay for 2, you're still able to access all those other receivers that other scientists have been able to put out over time. So that's a really cool thing that they were able to do here. So they were actually deployed these receivers vertically in the water, so they actually could also not only tell where they're going horizontally, but tell where some of these fish are moving up and down, because a lot of animals in the open ocean, and sharks and other fish, instead of migrating across distance from one point to another, they'll actually migrate from the surface to the bottom of the ocean and back. So they'll do a migration usually over the course of a day between different depths, which is really amazing. And then here's some pictures of us in some not so great weather conditions. And then down here is a oceanic white-tip shark, which are very beautiful. I haven't seen one in person, but my advisors do a lot of work on them. And so this kind of brings me to what I do now. So like I mentioned before, it's a small world. And my advisor, when I was a senior, I was able to take part of the research we did in the Bahamas my junior year and turn it into my undergraduate thesis. So I was looking at relationships between different species over the space. So kind of mapping out if these different species are using the similar area at the same time, and therefore looking at interactions between species. So we found some really cool stuff with how birds and large fish tend to pair up with the marine mammals and whales and stuff, and follow them to feed on what they feed on, etc., which is really cool. But anyway, so I went down the beginning of my senior year to work on this with them, and came back and visited. And I happened to end up there the day before there was a big hurricane in 2019. And so it's called Hurricane Dorian. Some people might have heard of it. And so I was stuck there during the hurricane, and it was obviously a very scary and detrimental event for so many people. But it also, things happen, and I had a crazy opportunity that came out of it. So my advisor, the week after, was going on a research boat trip out of a different island in the Bahamas with the Shed Aquarium, which is the aquarium out of Chicago. And so there was an extra spot because someone couldn't fly in. And I was able to go on a week-long research trip, and there I met a ton of different scientists. It was the first time that I was in the field surrounded by people I wasn't comfortable with, so it pushed me out of my comfort zone, and it allowed me to learn about different ways people do research. So I only thought for a really long time that if you wanted to do research, you had to become a professor and kind of go through the academic way. Whereas I was surrounded by these aquariums who were collecting research and working through these aquariums that are nonprofits to provide better information on the species that they do have in the aquarium, to therefore provide for the audience kind of when people come in. So one of the ladies worked for the Georgia Aquarium, and she was looking at microplastics content in tiger shark blood for their upcoming new shark exhibit. And also it helped kind of debunk about some things that I thought about different aquariums too, about I didn't know how involved they were in research, and to find out most of them are very, very involved and some of them are research stations was really, really cool experience for me. And through that, I was able to meet the person I work for now, Mickey McComb-Kobza. And so Mickey, Dr. Mickey, she got her, and part of her journey was she is from Colorado, and she decided to move to Florida after she graduated high school. And she worked in finance. She started diving some, but she never went to college until she was 28 years old. So she started really late in her career, as people typically think that that's a very late time to start school. And she was able to go to undergrad and then get her master's and then PhD. And now she is the president of all sharks and ray researchers in North and South America. And that kind of, I love to tell people too, is because a lot of people I talk to that are maybe older think that they missed the ball, that it's too late to get into the field, and that's just not true. And so as another anecdote off of that, I was at the conference 2 weeks ago of that group of researchers from North and South America, and there was people of all ages at a ton of different levels, involved in so many different ways too. So some people working for the state, some educators, some people working for nonprofits, some academics. And so there was 30-year-olds that were finishing up their undergrad, or there was 25-year-olds in the middle of their PhD. It was a whole mix of people. And so going back to Mickey though, and how I met her was I graduated during the pandemic in 2020, and I was actually supposed to go back to the Bahamas to be a research technician and kind of continue my research that I had started when I was down there in college. And, everything got canceled. Everything got put on pause. And so I was nannying out of college. I didn't really have a direction. I didn't know if I wanted to go to grad school or if I wanted to be a teacher. So when I met Mickey, who started Ocean First Institute kind of was my answer. So she took me under her wing and I became an educator. So I've spent the last 2 years primarily making class content, talking to students and people all like you about a ton of different topics, from sharks, my career, to climate change, ocean acidification, running different dissections. And through that work, we created a discovery center. And so I think over the past 2 years, we've been able to reach more than a couple of thousand kids in Colorado alone. And not even counting kind of our virtual classes we've been able to run and webinars. And alongside of that too, so Ocean First Institute is a research and education nonprofit based out of Boulder, Colorado. And we are a sister company to a dive shop. And so we kind of work out of the dive shop. And that is kind of where we run our programs out of, where we have our kind of different branches. And so out of Colorado, we run not only educational courses, we have a lot of citizen science projects as well. So I helped set up this past year a microplastics project where all across the Front Range of Colorado, at the base of all the mountains, at different schools, we were going and taking samples in creeks and drainages and looking at both the sediment and the water and looking at microplastic content, because we had realized there was no research that was done on microplastics and plastic pollution in Colorado. And because most of the time when we think about plastic pollution, we think of the ocean, but about 70% of all ocean pollution comes from inland sources. So this is kind of how we like to connect people in Colorado and other landlocked states to the ocean and kind of make them feel like their actions matter, because they do. So anything you put into the ground or throw outside or put into your trash bin, wherever you are, usually has a direct pipeline to the ocean somehow. And so every little thing matters. And so along with that too, Ocean First Institute has expanded to a research station in Florida over this past year, where they are starting some shark research in the area, looking at mostly hammerheads and other species that are vulnerable to capture. And then that kind of brings us to kind of, I have these other slides and I realize it's a little bit all over the place. I've added to this presentation since adding slides. And this kind of drives most of our research out of Ocean First Institute and my passions as well. And that is sharks are in trouble. And so at Ocean First Institute, we're actually all mostly shark scientists as well, which is just like a funny coincidence. But sharks kind of, even though they're what people see as, you know, not the cutest and cuddliest things, having healthy shark populations is directly correlated with having healthy ecosystems in the ocean. And having a healthy ocean means we have a healthy planet. About 50% of all oxygen we breathe, no matter where we are in the world, comes from the ocean, which is a surprise to a lot of people. And so by maintaining a healthy ocean, we can regulate our climate better, provide food for communities all across the globe, and, you know, just protect something that's about 70% of our entire planet. I think sometimes it's kind of funny. We talk about Earth as Earth, when in reality it probably should be called ocean, because it's mostly made of ocean. But yeah, so sharks are a big key player in that. And so they are threatened through shark finning and bycatch, so the accidental capture, and just general destructive fishing practices that kind of hurt different ecosystems, such as the reefs and mangroves and deep water vents and all those sorts of things as well. And so as scientists, so much about sharks is unknown. So most species are data deficient, or we don't, so which means we don't have enough information on them, that we don't actually know how we're impacting their populations. And so there's a couple of reasons too why, like I also mentioned this before and realize this is out of order, that part of the reason sharks are at a threat is they are slow going and late to mature. They have very long pregnancies, produce very few offspring, and they might not reproduce every year. So if we're taking out large portions of their population, whether by accident or on purpose, and we're not leaving enough species to help, or enough individuals in a species to help repopulate that species, then those species are in big trouble. And so, yeah, so that's, I realized, was a lot of research heavy. So that was my story, and my story was not linear, and I feel like that was probably shown in my presentation. And so kind of other sort of things you can do that I kind of also touched upon is education. So I've spent the last 2 years doing education, and that is something that is I'm extremely passionate about. And a lot of scientists now these days, especially in the marine sciences, you pretty much can't do research without also doing outreach. So because we are so passionate about the different animals we're working with, we want to make sure that our research is going towards good. So there's a problem with science where, science can happen, but when you don't have that bridge to the public, then how can you implement your findings? So by having outreach and education kind of embedded in our work, it allows us to show just how cool these different animals are and how important these ecosystems are, and get other people of all ages to care about it as well. So that is one path that you can go on, that I have so many friends that started off wanting to be research scientists and then have gone down this path, and now are just teachers. They either work out of a school or different education facilities, like nature societies and Audubons, or I have a friend that does educational programs out of a turtle rehab center, and doing virtual programs and in-person programs, taking people on field trips, going into the community. That's one way. Another way, kind of tied into that, is communication. So there is a huge need for people to create, graphic designs and media and write articles and kind of be the voice of the research and be the ones that are translating these papers and these findings into something digestible to the public. And so I have some friends also in this field that are working at different research labs and taking the findings of these researchers, turning them into really cool, resources for teachers, or also articles to gear towards people of all ages. I have friends who are artists that are making murals and that are speaking towards advocacy. I have friends that care about the ocean, but they care about people more. And I think a lot of scientists too, we obviously care about people similar, and if not this more. Yeah, we care about people just as we care about these systems. Part of the reason we're researching these ecosystems and these animals is we want to know how our actions can help these individuals, and then how then these healthy systems will benefit us. So I have friends that work in communities setting up, access to clean water and food, working with local schools and after school programs, overall to kind of help fix so many inequalities in our society that exist, that, are a big issue because, people feel climate change and the impacts of climate change disproportionately. The people that are feeling it the worst are not the ones emitting the most greenhouse gases. And so it's important to invest in communities and people. And people don't quite realize that that directly connects to the environment. But if you have a healthy environment, you have healthy people. Another sort of way people go is, those are some of the main ones, but I have friends who are in aquaculture. So they are research scientists, and then they decided they want to create sustainable food systems. So one of my friends, my childhood friend that I grew up with, that's a marine biologist, he actually works out of a kelp farm and an oyster farm out of Boston. And so he's working to create these oyster reefs that not only create stability for shorelines, they also filter out water and provide a sustainable food source for huge communities at a very low cost. Same with kelp. Kelp farming is huge. That's booming all across both coasts in colder waters because kelp provides us with so many vitamins and nutrients. It also, when you grow this kelp, it produces so much oxygen. It doesn't take up space on land, and it actually creates temporary ecosystems. So it becomes kind of these resting spots for certain species, and then providing oxygen in the water, taking out CO2 from the atmosphere. So that's a really cool thing people are doing as well. And that's just a couple. So one of my favorite climate scientists, her name is Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. She's also kind of into marine policy, and she's a marine biologist by training. She has some really cool talks that I recommend people look into, kind of about creating your own climate action Venn diagram. So it's by looking at kind of things you are interested in, things you are good at, and things you know, wanted. I can't remember the third one, but basically it's looking at 3 different aspects of your life and creating the way that you can fit into the solution. Oh yeah, it's your job, what you're interested and passionate about, and then what you're good at. And so by looking at those 3 things and kind of figuring out what overlaps, you can kind of figure out what your place is in, whether that's marine science or ocean research or climate science or the climate crisis in general. And so I think that's a really cool thing to think about too, because people think they have to be scientists to make a difference and kind of do all these things, but in your daily life and in the ways that you are good at things, you can be involved in any way, and just put your skills to use in a way that you're passionate about. Because if you're not passionate about something, then you're not going to have the motivation to be as invested. And yeah, and so on that note, I realize we're pretty close to time, but do you have any questions?
Alexa, thank you so much. This has been really fascinating. Marion, if you have questions, you can unmute yourself to ask them if that's easier, or you can put them in the chat as well, whatever you're comfortable with. I actually have a couple questions, if that's okay. While Marion's thinking. It sounds like people come to these fields from lots of different backgrounds. If you don't live near the ocean or on a coast, is it still something that you can pursue?
Absolutely. Which is part of the reason I love my work here in Colorado so much is I have friends too that are from the Midwest, or Mickey being from Colorado and ending up in this field and then coming back to Colorado to start this organization. She started for the same reason, is to give people that outlet. So like I was saying before, with our Microplastics Project, that's a really cool thing because that is just citizen science. And so it's through this project of looking at the drainage behind your house and understanding that water travels to the nearest stream, and all streams and rivers lead to the ocean, that kind of gives people that understanding that, oh, my backyard, even though I'm thousands of miles away from the ocean, what I do here matters. And so that's a really cool thing we work with, because we get the question a lot, you're a Ocean Research Institute in Colorado, that doesn't really make sense. But we're here for that reason. So we're here to try to connect people to the outdoors, and as someone who lives in a landlocked state, and if you're interested in this field, I recommend, reaching out to different organizations. People love to talk and share their stories, or there's a ton of really good resources online as well. And if you have like an aquarium near you or anything like that, or any sort of environment, like maybe you have like an Audubon Society or something like that, volunteering is amazing. It's how I also first got interested too. So not only did I grow up on the coast, but spending a lot of time at aquariums and kind of just volunteering to do composting and other things that are related to the environment, kind of just, and through that learning, just understanding that everything is interconnected. So even if you're interested in the ocean and you feel like you might not have the ability to get to the ocean, like a lot of people don't, but you care about it, well, you can just care about your backyard. And so that's kind of a big part of what we do here in Colorado, is those local projects that get people feeling connected to the world around them. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I guess sort of related to that, do you think even before you go to college, is it important to have some experience in marine science or working related field beforehand?
I think it depends. So like I said, when I started, I was really lucky to know from a young age that I loved the environment. I love the outdoors. And a lot of that was just being in my backyard, and kind of just being creative and curious. And then I have people, like when I went back and visited the research station I worked at beginning of my senior year, there was a woman there who was an intern, and she was 30 years old, and she had been working in marketing and finance up until that point for 10 years. Didn't do anything previous. Had a change of heart, realized she loves sea turtles, and changed career paths. And so I think it's important for people to follow what they're passionate about too. And so that might not lead in a linear path. So maybe you want to go in one direction the first part of your life, and then later on are like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like, I want to be involved in wildlife conservation or education. So then I have people reaching out to me of all ages to volunteer with us, whether that be doing trash cleanups or wanting to sit in on some classes. Yeah, I've had people that are like 75 years old. I want to just like learn things and get involved. So I don't think it's necessary to jump in early. And if people know and they want to, that's fantastic. But I just am always worried that people are going to feel like they missed the ball. And I'm here to remind them they're not going to miss the ball, because it can happen whenever they want to. So, yeah.
We are at the end of our time. Alexa, thank you so much. It sounds like your career is amazing, really exciting, and thank you for sharing all the different kinds of opportunities and paths that following your passion may lead you to. And thank you for doing the research and educating about these really important species that we are related to and connected to as being on this planet. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. This has been a really cool opportunity.
All right, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.